Welcome, everybody, to a new Fireside Chat. I'm your host, David Goslin, and we're here with a new roster of guests, our contributors from the latest issue of new Lyre Magazine, which we want to give everyone a taste of. There's a lot of talent out there, and so we do want people to get a sense of that, and there's really no reason in 2025 to be concerned about the state of culture. All sorts of promising things are developing, and it's important to make sure people know about that. So that's what this fireside chat is really about. And so we have three distinguished poets here who have all contributed to the latest issue. And I thought it would be cool if we got to know what people have been up to, what you guys do in your day to day, and how you're wrestling with the mysteries these days. Our latest issue has the theme of mystery, and poetry is, I'd say, always in one way or another dealing with the fundamental mysteries of existence, life. So it's interesting to see how people wrestle with these things since they're not really going away. I think that's becoming clearer for folks. So how are you guys?
Well, I'm doing okay.
Magnificent.
Happy to be here.
So Stuart Burke, what have you been up to these days? Just tell us what's your background and for our
Well, I'm
viewers.
retired from, I was a criminal investigator for the U.S. federal government, and I've been retired about 8 years, and I teach and study martial arts, and I, as you know, do a bit of writing. I have certain enthusiasms and rabbit holes I go down. I enjoy traveling, and COVID kind of, affected me as well as everyone else. But my daughter is now grown and has her own job, so no complaints here.
God bless.
Try to approach, maintain my sense of wonder, and I'm seldom disappointed.
Never a dull moment these days, huh?
Yes.
And Rachel, how about yourself? You're down there over in Tennessee?
Yeah, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I retired in the spring. Well, I retired in January of 23 from teaching. I'd been teaching the last 16 years in high school as an inclusion and resource teacher, which is like the most glamorous, hardest assignment, I think, because you don't get your own stage, quote unquote. Not that I was looking for a stage, but other people were. And so it made it hard to play well with friends, kind of, or feel like they were playing well with me. But I'm thankful to be retired. I have three grandchildren that live about 15 minutes down the road from me, which is amazing because my daughter was across the country and in Canada and in Alaska for from 18 to the time she was 33 or 34, and then she moved back here when she was going to have twins. So that's a delight to have grandchildren nearby. I get to work on my writing now more, like focus on that, and I am coming out with a second book of poetry probably in October from Main Street Rag, and I am working on a novel. I meet twice a month with a group of writers who are working mostly on novels, and that they give me the courage to keep going and give me really good feedback. And I get to go on a all expenses paid writers retreat, which I was accepted for, called Good Lit in Stanford, Kentucky. And Brett Lott, who's a New York Times bestselling author, is like the keynote person that's going to be there. And so I'm excited about that. That's in August.
Very cool.
Yes.
Very cool. Adam, how are things in your neck of the woods? You're down there in Indiana or up there.
Yes, yes. So for, I mean, I've been a frequent guest here, but for those who haven't heard or seen me, I live in St. John, Indiana, which is about 45 minutes outside of Chicago. I grew up in the area. I'm an attorney. I practice both municipal law and appellate litigation in both Indiana and Illinois. I've done that for just over 15 years now. Um, my wife is from Argentina, actually, so we're a trilingual household, English, Spanish, and Italian. I have an 8-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter. And when I find time, not only do I write poetry, but I've written short and longer fiction as well. And I play piano and compose music. So that's my story.
Once again, never a dull moment, that's for sure. Huh? With yeah, the kids sometimes make an appearance in the background, which is always fun. So yeah, if Johnny shows up, shout out to Johnny and his sister.
Oh,
So
and
yeah,
my son, what interestingly is a published poet. He had in first grade, he had his poem accepted by a kid's um, literary review. So I guess it runs in the family.
Nice.
yay.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, and actually, a funny little travel story here. When I was in Rome and I had messaged Adam last minute, I just sent him a video of, panorama or something in real time. And Adam, you have an ancestor who was a minor poet in southern Italy, right? And so the manuscripts,
Yeah.
the full work was only there were just two manuscripts at the archives at Rome. And so Adam asked me if I could go there so that he could get a copy of the manuscript, if I could just take pictures so that he could translate the Italian, his ancestor. And yeah, so that's what we did. So now Adam's got the whole
Yeah, and here it is. I'm working on the translation as we speak. My goal is to have a full translation into English published.
that's fantastic.
How fascinating.
Alceste de,
Delolis.
de Lolis.
That was my grandmother's maiden name, and it turns out we're actually he's a cousin of a direct ancestor, so it does run in the family, I guess.
Another one of these strange things, huh? How, when you look
Yeah.
back in the history. I know myself, my grandmother, I mean, one of these weird things, I don't know if that's a generational thing where they have all sorts of things they don't mention that it's like, how come you never told me that in like 80 years? Isn't that something that you'd mention? One of our cousins, or I'd be my distant cousin, but from Italy, was Secondo Casadei, who's a renowned composer in from Romagna, and he pioneered the folk music of the Romagna region. So to this day, the song Romagna Mia plays on the radio regularly. And yeah, so there's a bit of my grandmother's father would drive him to his gigs in his horse carriage. He had a horse carriage business back in the day. That's how folks used to do it. And yeah, so that's that. He was in the family, and it's just funny that nobody ever mentioned it before. So yeah, all sorts of strange things like that, right? The further we delve into our histories of others. So with that said, guys, why don't we share a bit of poems here from the latest issue? It's a pretty hefty issue. It's a spring summer 2025 issue, and yeah, it should keep people busy for a good part of the summer. I reckon if people take their time and really sift through this carefully. So I'd let Rachel, we know you have to leave a bit early. So I propose that people read something of theirs that they contributed to the issue. And then if there's something that another poem by another contributor that they thought stood out, we can just alternate. We don't need to have a specific order, but figure just, Rachel, you could maybe take it away, say something about your poem, or whatever
Okay.
you like.
Well, it helped me for you to mention the umbrella and to read the front of the this new lyre and see the theme of mystery. I honestly uh feel a little bewildered that I'm in this because stylistically I'm so different from most of the poets that you have published. Um, but this one, Depression Takes a Walk, uh, given that theme, I would say that it's the mystery of grace in the mundane. um, so Depression Takes a Walk. Lady in the long black faux leather coat, you are dressed like the night, so my eyes nearly missed you. My car nearly hit you. Oh, altered trajectories our lives would take these seconds after. You in the back of an ambulance, hastily packed up like a picnic lunch in a rainstorm, and me voicing my shock and alarm to the police. She came out of nowhere, calling my husband in a thin, wobbly voice, informing the insurance company in tears before plunging into the black abyss instead of clawing at its edge as I do now. Lady, I need you right now to be safely walking down the lit sidewalk to your apartment so I can feel the comforting banality of driving home at the end of a marathon day, sweaty and cold after working out, saying these lines out loud as I propel myself forward, knowing if it had been up to me to pay attention, 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 I would have failed us both.
I really like that one. That really stood out for me when I was reading the journal, this particular issue of the journal. For, if I may, for one reason was I had just read an article about the old Twilight Zone, and it said one of the most famous, and some people say it was one of the best episodes. And it was based on a short story, I think. But I think the actress was, remember Inger Stevens from way back when? I don't know if anyone remembers her. And this woman's stops by a highway at a kind of very isolated gas station, and she keeps stopping further down the road, and she tells people, well, there's this man I keep seeing the same man by the side of the road wherever I go. And it turns out she had I think she had a drinking problem and crashed and died, and that's death coming to. And that really just popped into. I know it wasn't intentional, but that's what poetry does, these connections. So that this something you wrote is now connected to me in a way that really resonated. And moreover, I wrote, maybe I'll have to send it to David and see if he likes it. I wrote kind of a noirish poem, and your poem reminded me of that. So I got a lot out of it.
Well, thank you. I submitted that poem over 30 times.
Really?
So, yeah. Yeah.
Well, just speaking as a lawyer, it definitely spoke to several of my own experiences, having done a stint at a personal injury firm in the past, particularly informing the insurance company and all the bureaucracy that comes after the event occurs. What caught me most about it, though, have you ever read Aldous Huxley's Island? It's his final novel. Um, in the basically, if Brave New World is his dystopian vision, Island is his contrasting utopian vision. And in a previous issue, I did run an essay about that. So further New Lyre issues, but there's a constant refrain in this utopian island somewhere between India and Burma. There's they had trained these birds to say attention, attention, attention as a refrain in the background, sort of the idea of mindful before mindfulness became a thing. This was the idea of mindfulness or being living in the moment. So when you have that refrain at the end, that immediately called to mind Island. I don't know if you had the same idea in mind by repeating the refrain. I'm curious what your use of it was.
It was willing myself to be present, to stay present.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same idea then.
Interesting.
And what I like about your poems, Rachel, there are some overarching themes. For example, I think this one, in a sense, is a good example because there's a spiritual struggle, but it's couched in all this, whether it's bureaucracy. Here you're dealing with informing the insurance company in tears before plunging into that black abyss. And you're also funny. Your poems are genuinely, they make me smile, they make me giggle. And yet they're all dealing with spiritual themes, questions of transcendence. And here, part of transcendence oftentimes is not, if you will, escaping, but being present, right? Attention. We always need that reminder. So there are these reminders that come across the flurry of information overload and panic and chaos that you often capture in mundane things, right? Dealing with your coworkers, dealing with the insurance folks. It's funny, the market. I was just speaking with Rachel, and the marketplace is another one with everything going on in the world. And you were talking about, it's the teachings of Jesus colliding with the futures, in the market is funny. It's very fun. And so I think that's why these poems really do belong in this issue. They all deal with some kind of transcendent issue, but they get at it in a way that I think everyone can relate to. And it's again, the poems have some humor in them, which is
I had to chuckle. Speaking of humor, when we were chatting before you started recording, we were talking about, you said, well, if a parrot lands on the top of Rachel's head, and then here Adam, the parrot makes its appearance here.
Right.
I think you're prophetic in that regard.
Right.
You were prophetic.
And and so Rachel, that's a good start. Why don't you read us what's a poem that stood out from another contributor that you enjoyed? And I think you mentioned Bob Zisk, really, really strong writer, a lot of very cool stuff. So yeah, feel free to give Bob Zisk a shout out.
I have different pages dog-eared, and I'm trying to find it. I don't know what page it is.
Right, he's right at the he's right at the front. It's the it's after periphrastic ekphrasis and before near 2 Mile Dam and gentleness. That being said, I can also read it if you want, and you guys can just respond.
Wait a second. Okay, you said it's
like the 5th or 6th one from the beginning of his offering.
Okay, I found it. Okay, so yeah, so it's the page numbers aren't on here. Okay. In the Desert by Bob Zisk. How I miss you, saxifrage, Jack in the Pulpit, skunk cabbage, and soft ground hugging violets. Why is spring full of dry regrets? Yet thorns and spines are not without their beauty in this time of drought, when brown dog ticks burrow deep into the fur-covered meat of tender toes and soft nail beds, and Tigger chews until he bleeds. Green and golden koalas extend their labored embrace across the sand and stone of this hard desert floor, mottled with hair, fumite, and spore, the dry stream beds clotted with bones and brush, driftwood, and pine cones, all bedraggled with salt cedar, are a solitude of feather. Fur and antler, clear catacomb of open air where mule deer roam. Prairie dogs whistle, and the gaunt coyote does not lose the scent.
Very nice. Coming from Oklahoma, I can identify with some of the imagery.
Yeah, it struck me that I've meditated a lot on the concept of desert and wilderness, not that I've been or lived, inhabited those places, but metaphorically, it's a place of few distractions and of stark reality. And of course, what I read, like Jesus going into the wilderness, it's a place of struggle, but because all the other distractions fall away, it's a place to hear and to listen, and for things to be just exactly as they are, and so less artifice.
Yeah, and the fact that he, as a sense, he chooses scent, right? Does not lose the scent is a fun little twist, which captures the same thing as, right, whether it's hearing, seeing, smelling, right, and introducing that as a spiritual dimension, as a metaphor for a higher spiritual reality. And here, right, what it's not, is there a moral of the story per se? I don't know that that's the main issue here, but recognizing that there is, the coyote does not lose the scent, right? There's a pursuit of something, and Bob is very good at using wilderness and the natural world to capture something that transcends it. Again, I mean, I'm using that word a lot, but there's a lot of that in this issue, and I don't think that's a theme that's going to go away anytime soon. So yeah, Bob, it's great. There was another one that caught my eye, but if people have any thoughts, feel free to chime in. But just to drive,
the entire poem is encapsulated, I think, in the third couplet. Thorns and spines are not without their beauty in this time of drought. He's finding the beauty in what, to someone who has, let's say, an economic interest in the land or a survival interest might not see. In other words, beauty is something disconnected from our will to survive, our will to dominate, et cetera, et cetera. It's something apart and alone. And he's observing that beauty in this otherwise hostile terrain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like the poem turns on several oxymorons like that. The dry regrets, the spring with dry regrets, and the barbed embrace, as well as what you just read. Yeah.
Yeah, and just the idea that the wilderness is kind of driven by something that it doesn't fully understand, right? The prairie dogs, the coyotes, there is something in a sense they have a calling, right? They can't necessarily conceptualize that or whatnot. Hey, human beings have trouble conceptualizing these things, but yeah, he's capturing that in a certain respect. So there's that mystical dimension, which is very cool. Um, yeah, we could. Bob has so many great ones. I feel like I'll just we could throw one. We are not alone, and then we can let somebody else start reading their poems. But just for the hell of it, Bob, great stuff. I encourage everybody again to check out our issue, and just to give people a sense. So this one is called "We Are Not Alone" for Lyre Madiba from Johnson's Mesa by Bob Zisk. Quite early in the morning, when small birds had not yet awakened, and their words, their tender Latin, silent on soft wing of fleeing sleep and rustling boughs of morning, hovered in a dark arboreal lair of gently billowing pine-scented air. I stirred in the feathers of my mummy bag and caught a glint, a spark, a glowing swag of light that was too bright to be a star, too soft to be a flame from a dying fire. It was not one bright light, but rather 10 that glowed before first light of daybreak sun. I stared out through the darkling night, caught like a curious buck in a jacklight. And there, almost close enough for touch, I wiggled into a limb-loosening stretch, and my eyes focused in on 5 mule deer who measured me with almond eyes and no fear. I saw an antlered king accompanied by 4 proud queens, dun and full of his seed. They gazed at me. He shook his antlers' branches, champed the maze's hard earth, showed me his haunches, and in the night breeze led his mistresses to his seraglio deep in the trees.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful and very cool. Again,
What I like about it is the title "We Are Not Alone." Immediately, you think of aliens.
right.
That's a refrain used, and then you realize, oh no, we're close to home. Here we have this planet, the creatures we share this planet with, and the way he personifies the deers, the king with his harem and his seraglio. It brings to life uh, the shared life of our planet that we have with our fellow creatures here.
Somewhere near Roswell, New Mexico.
Yeah.
You get the sense that Bob has actually, been camping. He's not just describing something he read about, but I get the sense that he's actually been there. That he's,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's not like a dumb tourist experience,
Correct.
right? There's something let's go camping, it's not some city boy.
Well, he knows how the deer behave clearly. I
Right.
mean, my experience of deer has been slowing down on the road while they run across it. But
Right.
this is clearly from the perspective of someone who's observed them up close.
Yeah, I know. Very nice stuff, Bob. Shout out to Bob Zisk. Who Stuart, Adam, what do you got for us?
I'll defer to Stuart on this time.
Okay.
All right. Well, would you like me to read someone else's first or one of my own first?
Read us something of yours.
Well, since we're on the theme of nature, I will read. Let's see if I can find it. The Way to Water. since that seems to sort of, Bob's poem put me in a naturalistic mood in a way.
Right.
Although I can't say I've been on safari, but nevertheless, here we go. This is called The Way to Water. Hips sway through the fronds, metronomic. The way is long, but the pace never varies. How can a heart so big be so economic? The head knows only what the soul can carry. Young and old struggle to follow the monarch who needs no map for the journey. Eyes worn, skin lined like an old chart, the matriarch learned the herd mind before nations were born. An hour or two each night, sleep is fleeting. The air is charged with throbbing, infrasonic calls from bulls to bells for frenzied meetings. Water! The sight of calves at play is comic. Water's solace, the journey of life raw. The leader waits for the young to drink their fill. Her mind is the font from which they must draw deep draughts before she stoops, tires, and grows still. That's the source of this poem was a remark. There's a quartet of novels called the Cornelius Quartet by Michael Moorcock, who's a British fantasist and sci-fi author. But in it, it's kind of an offhand remark. And I'd been rereading this, and it said that we effectively live 150 years. Because when we're children, we hear stories about our grandparents and parents, and that becomes part of our mind state that we carry forward through life and informs our, how we live our life. And then we have our own lifespan. And then after we die, the stories about us are carried on. So for about, assuming we don't die extremely prematurely, there's about 150 years worth of memories pertaining that we both had or that people have of us, unless we're Leonardo da Vinci or something like that. And that got me thinking, and I'm trying to remember exactly how I went from there to a herd of elephants. But the line, hips sway through the fronds, metronomic, it just popped into my mind as I was somehow making the link between a herd of elephants and this concept of living, 150 years. And that's how this poem came to be. It's a little unusual for me. Probably not typical of my output, such as it is, but nevertheless.
I mean, I always like the way you throw in, you got these nice memorable lines, and the head knows only what the soul can carry, right? Again, you're talking about elephants making their way to water and all that. And it's you're developing a very beautiful and intricate metaphor. And then there are these nice lucid moments that you sort of pepper.
Well, and survival kind of goes back to Bob's prior poem, how survival is, it confers a terrible beauty on our existence. And, so that's why this poem popped into mind after you read Bob's.
Yeah. I'm reminded of, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, it sounds almost like a rhymed and metered version of Robinson Jeffers and his very vivid, naturalistic poems. You're out in Africa instead of California, but the tone and the description I were so vivid, it immediately brought hit up on that. There's the old saying, memory like an elephant. elephants do. They visit the bones of their deceased elephants, and they have this, I guess, innate memory, we would call it. You don't typically observe in other animals. So I think it's a very appropriate subject for the themes you touch on here.
Mm.
The other reading, I have a practice of after every poem I write a paragraph or two about, well, how did this come into being? What made me think this? What was going on at the time? And this does have a pandemic element, coronavirus element, because of the elephants are very social and so are human beings, and that the incredible disruption. And that same thing with elephants, when the environment changes, there's not enough water. And in a case, sometimes some of the young males are basically told to leave because they're disruptive, or there's not enough water for all. It's just so COVID was lurking in the background.
Interesting.
I actually enjoy writing the little part after each poem more than the poem itself.
Well, no, but it's also fun to retrace one's steps, right? When we're talking about composition, we don't fully understand how a poetical concept or a melody pops into our head, right? I think that's a prime example of mystery that's right there, that somehow there are always these philosophical schools that want to be like, there's no mystery, it's all like ones and zeros. You can reduce everything down to binary systems, whether it's positivism or transhumanism or, enlightenment philosophy that's really just about sort of logic. But then what about the things that transcend logic, which are very real, which are a reality, that if we deny them, if we deny these mysteries, it mystifies or it obscures the things that are right before us. So the practice of reflecting and ruminating on the fact that we do get these ideas and then to sort of trace their origins, I think that's very cool. It's very useful, and it shows that there is some higher process. We don't fully grasp it at any one moment, but it's there, and there are a lot of ways to retrace it, at least indirectly, which only is more humbling, right? Kind of reality that it's there and that you were able to get to this poem.
Do you attribute that to your background as an investigator? It sounds very like investigator-ish to me.
No, although I think the concept, the theme of mystery, obviously as a criminal investigator, where I'm trying to but it's it's fascinating to me. Some writers very much write from their immediate environment and their experience. I've tried to write about my time in Iraq and things like that, and it just doesn't work for me. I'm more, I don't know. It's just not me. I want to write about things I don't know in a way, because I want to learn about them.
Right.
I want to feel them and experience them. That's just for better, for maybe one day I will be able to write more from, and I do, but not in a very literal way. Whereas Bob's poem, I got the feeling that he's actually been camped out there under the stars and seen the deer scat and all. I get that feeling.
Well, the beauty of poetry, right? The beauty of metaphor is that it does allow us, though, to depart from the immediate moment or to not be caught in it, right? It doesn't mean we don't transmute or translate that visceral experience in some way, but there's also a freedom where you're not bound to that. And I mean, I think that's one of the key fundamental aspects of human creativity, of imagination, right, of discovery, is that you kind of have to depart from what you know or from what's familiar if you're going to make a discovery. right? If you're going to, yeah, make some kind of change where you people break profile, they surprise us. So yeah, God bless Stuart. That's very nice. And you have a lot of fine pieces in this issue as well. So yeah, there's a lot to discover from you. And so yeah, why don't you something that stood out that you would like to read by another
Well,
contributor?
I must confess, I I misunderstood my remit here. I thought I was supposed to read one of my colleagues here with me in this discussion, but I'm going to read something by a poem by a poet we've heard from previously, John Martin, or John H.B. Martin, as he's, let's see now if you've published quite a bit of John's work over the years, and I really, again, admire his work. So I'm going to read The Choice by John H.B. Martin. Between the burqa and the lush bikini, I wish there were more room for compromise where I might rest my battle-weary eyes, not on bare flesh, say, but on what's more dreamy. Say, fields of corn and trees grown rich and creamy compared to what they were before, when ice contrived to fill our world with other lies than those that waxed less innocent or steamy. A modest elevation in the dress, where even eloquence is buttoned down, does more for beauty than mere wantonness can ever do, with far too much, or, frown by frown, with far too little to depress the spirits of the wise man or the clown. I like John's sense of humor, and it has his work has I feel a rootedness that he has, and I just really have, again, over the years, published a lot of his works, and I really admire it, and I learned something from it.
John Martin is a great poet, and yeah, there's a lot. He's got a lot of. I'd say he's our most eclectic character in the issues, and that we have a spot for that. We have a spot for all sorts of different things in our issue, but it's almost, I don't want to say it's jarring, but the poems grow on you. The first time I usually read a John Martin poem, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of acrobatics, there's a lot of different things, and there are a lot of eccentricities, and including the humor. But then it sticks with you, and you continue to chew on it. You continue to chew on the lines, and you're like, that's a pretty good poem, actually. And the thoughts start to resonate more. And I'd say that is indicative of a good poem. You kind of want to go back to it. And, he does always have that element of surprise. He leaves you with a zinger, but it's not just for effect, right? He's not just gunning for effect, though there's a lot of effects, oftentimes, wordplay and stuff. But yeah, it's very edifying once you make it the whole way through. And yeah, who starts a poem? Who starts a poem between the burqa and the lush bikini? It's not like the first. Oh, that sounds like a beginning of a great poem. Not maybe, but yeah.
I just want to comment on the form. I mean, we have a classic Petrarchan sonnet here, and I think this illustrates how a form as old and tried and true, and it is never obsolete. Here we have a bunch of a fresh. It's not even a fresh twist. It's just that the technique makes the form come alive again. Where we have the clever rhymes: bikini, creamy, steamy. Those wouldn't pop out to me as end rhymes right away. And then we have the frown enjambment, line break by frown parenthetical, which we it creates the rhyme, but doesn't interrupt the flow of the sentence, and then that final zinger or the clown. This is masterfully done, but very in keeping with the strict form of a Petrarchan sonnet, and I think that shows high level of poetic craft. And when I think of a great poet, it's how you can use a tried and true form and still sound fresh.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's a lot of what our issue aims to do, is to demonstrate the timelessness of timeless forms and their relevance today. Where I was talking with, I mentioned before we started recording, that I was speaking with a young musical composer. He teaches composition, studies, plays harpsichord. He was performing at one of the Baroque music festival recitals, and I was just talking about this idea that he resonated with, which is that for me, classical, when we think classical music or classical poetry, I believe that lends itself to development. Classical music is about development, although it's often cast in the opposite sense, right? Classical is something of the past. Then there was romantic music. Then there was contemporary music, and people have all these categories. But finally, classical, I believe the classical principle is that which allows you to take a theme and to develop it, to give it a thorough motivic composition. And yeah, I think this is a great example. It's a classical poem. It's not classical because it sounds like it was written in the 18th or 17th century, but more about its approach to development and to form and develop, unfolding an idea ultimately. So the classical principles allow us to do that in a way that I'd say is unparalleled. And so the more we have people studying these forms and discovering how they can develop their own ideas using those forms, then you get things like this, right? You see masterful craft, and yet you see plenty of newness, right? Plenty of originality. So fine choice, Stuart. So we come to Adam, and you contributed, right? You contributed an essay, so or you did contribute poems. So yeah, we featured some.
I do have poems at the very beginning here.
Right, of course.
Yeah,
yeah. You kind of sort of opened up our Egypt theme, right? It's the opening and closing of our issue. The bookends.
Well, I do have one of the poems picked out to read. So just to preface this, when you told me the theme of this issue would be ancient Egypt, I got extremely excited. I've had an interest in the civilization since I was a boy, and I wrote a lengthy essay at the end about its rediscovery and its impact on the Western culture. But 9 years ago, I had actually, from reading about Greek and Roman verse, I had wondered, well, what was Egyptian poetry? Was there a form to ancient Egyptian poetry, which interestingly has echoes in the Hebrew poetry you see, like in the Song of Songs in the Bible, and to a lesser extent the Psalms, and it follows a very a stress pattern of syllables and a binary form where a line is repeated but phrased differently. So taking that, I used that and wrote a series of love songs, and then two long, or no, not two, like 4 or 5 longer hymns that I had collected. And it was kind of an experiment, and I let it sit on my hard drive for years. And then I sent it off to Dave and said, kind of as an afterthought, what do you think of these? And he said, no, we should run a few of these in the issue. So that's where these came from. And I do plan on publishing the volume. It's called The of the Mouth. What the opening of the mouth refers to is a funerary ceremony in ancient Egypt, where an image or the mummy of the deceased would have its mouth open with an adze to sort of breathe life into the deceased. And that's kind of what I aimed to do with this, was revive a style that had fallen, had been completely forgotten and lost for thousands of years. And that's kind of what I detail in the essay, is the complete loss of a civilization and a language, and its miraculous rediscovery. And now we know more about ancient Egypt than many other civilizations, when 250 years ago we knew next to nothing beyond what the Bible and a few Greek authors left us about it. So it's one of the miracles of human knowledge. So I'm going to read you the fourth of the love songs from the opening of the mouth. Thy breath is like the lotus sweet of scent, perfuming the twilight air, wafting its fragrances toward the stars. When I smell my evening lotus, when I sumptuous breath, I reel, drunk as with wine. I stagger like a raving madman. And how I long for more, how I am wrapped with that scent, with the fragrance that rises through evening, the sweetness that softens the dusk.
You'll see when I misunderstood our charter, that's the one. That's the one by Adam I had actually flagged to read. I was much taken with it. And so I'm so tickled that you chose that one to read.
Yeah, and I almost say here,
great minds think alike, they say.
That's right.
And for people that you just only briefly cut out there, Adam, but overall it was good. But I'll just reread it again for our viewers as well, and also just because it's worth revisiting quickly here. So Adam, you write, thy breath is like the lotus sweet of scent, perfuming the twilight air, wafting its fragrances towards the stars. When I smell my evening lotus, when I inhale her sumptuous breath, I reel, drunk as with wine. I stagger like a raving madman. And how I long for more. How I am wrapped with that scent, with the fragrance that rises through evening, the sweetness that softens the dusk. That's a fine poem, Adam. And again, when was it written? I believe it has this transcendent quality where, was it written 2,000 years ago? Was it written yesterday? It doesn't really matter at a certain point. And you have a lot of people who try to do that, right? They're trying to like imitate Shakespeare or some older verse form, and yet it sounds a bit dated. It sounds a bit. So this doesn't have that. It's actually refreshing, which is kind of surprising, or seems kind of surprising that we'd be refreshed. But no, and it's the fact that you did research, right? You weren't just writing any old poem here, right? This is based on your research into the traditions of classical Egyptian poetry, which is quite fascinating that you just decided to go down that rabbit hole.
Well, it was one of those things, if you're going to do it, you should do it right. And, research was painstaking, but I think in the end, it produced something I was happy with.
The title, The Opening of the Mouth, the first thing that popped into my mind was the line from W.B. Yeats's A Drinking Song. The one I'm thinking of, I think love comes in at the eye and goes out the mouth, but that's just popped
Yeah.
in. That's the first thing that popped into my head when I know that was probably unintentional, but that's what's so wonderful about every every poem contains a mystery waiting to be discovered, a linkage between what you know and what you didn't know. And that's what makes it exciting and fresh for me anyway.
Well, yeah,
Even though it may have been written thousands of years ago.
oh yeah, every reader brings their own reading to the poem. Now, I don't want to get into, that's not all what a poem is, but every reader takes away something unique to them based on their own experiences, and that's fun to hear in your case.
There are a lot of complementary poems in this issue on the Egypt theme from our translation section. Michael Birch, who's very generous, contributed many wonderful, beautiful, and finely crafted translations of original ancient Egyptian poems. So, following that one, I would like volunteer one of these Egyptian poems just to give viewers a sense of the variety here. So this is Harper's song, Tomb of Enteth. So Harper's songs that was one of the song traditions in ancient Egypt. Often they're depicted as blind harpsists or whatnot singing. The blind poet, I don't know why it's such a thing, but it is. And all the more I'm astounded, right, that the blind poets were, thanks to them, we have so many beautiful things. It's a miracle. So from the tomb of the pharaoh Intef, here lies a happy prince, because death is the kindest fate. One generation passes, another remains. So it has been since our eldest ancestors. Now those who were once gods rest in their sepulchres along with other nobles and those who built their tombs. Their palaces are gone. And what has become of them? What of the words of Imhotep and Hardadef, whose sayings are still recited in Tyre? What of their palaces? Their walls have collapsed into ruins. Their halls have vanished as if they never existed. And no one returns from that realm to inform us of their state or to calm our fears. We remain in the dark until we join them. Hence rejoice with happy hearts. It is best to forget. Heedlessness is happiness. Humor your hearts as long as you live. Perfume your hair with myrrh. Adorn yourself in your finest linens. Anoint yourself with the costliest oils fit for a god. Heap up your treasures here on earth. Let your heart remain buoyant. Don't let it sink. Humor your heart and find happiness. Here on earth, do as your heart demands. What use is mourning when weary-hearted Osiris pays tears no heed? Weeping and wailing spares no man from the grave. So make every day your holiday. Never tire of joy's pursuits, because no one is allowed to take his possessions with him, and none who departs ever returns. Harper's Song, Tomb of Intef. Now, I'll remark that this is just one of many varieties of Harper's songs that deal with death, right? Some are a bit more, as Birch notes in his commentaries, some of the songs are a bit more carpe diem, hey, don't worry. I mean, and then some are a bit more dour, facing the realities and consequences of death. But all the more, right? It's fascinating. This is from thousands of years ago, and Birch manages to capture the spirit of this poem very beautifully. And yeah, it just shows that, as you know, Egyptians in many ways weren't that different from folks today, right? There are certain universals, and there's some humor here as well, which is always nice. That's, I guess, one of the most human things we have, right? Is humor, especially talking about death and all sorts of things like that. Yeah, you have to have humor, right? And so this is beautiful, and I love the line: "What use is mourning when weary-hearted Osiris pays tears no heed?" It's beautiful.
Just this morning, I read a review of a book that just came out about a German fellow who was in charge of the excavation of Pompeii.
Well, and we
I'm sorry?
Keep
in
going.
charge of the excavation of Pompeii, and being a non-Italian, that was fairly controversial, but he's written a book about his experiences. And he was talking about there is a section of Pompeii that's been excavated. It's called the Villa of the Mysteries. And that resonated with me because I knew we were going to be, that was going to be our theme today. And there's some question, some experts say, oh, they have the murals of the frescoes and on the walls. And some experts have said, oh, this is a Dionysian rite. And others say, no, it's a mere wedding scene. But the guy, I wish I could think of his name and give him credit, the German author, he said, the way we interpret the past, the excavated past in this instance, is so informed by our own religious tradition or our own national culture, that we bring to the way. And when Adam was talking about Egypt, I thought of that. It's almost impossible not to view it through the lens of your own experience. And yet, he said this guy is more interested in less in the villas that were owned by the elite, but where the slaves lived. And in one, there's a nail on the wall where they could hang their oil lamp, and they had painted a little white rectangle. The purpose of that was to reflect the light better. And even finding white paint for a slave would have been incredibly difficult. He may have had to steal it. They don't really have money as such. And it made me think of just the mystery of life and antiquity and interpretation. It was just fascinating to read this morning of all mornings. And Adam reminded me of that when he read his poem.
I think I got cut off again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on this, is that, when so much of what we think of ancient Egypt in the popular opinion is informed by, horror movies, The Mummy, yes. It's tombs and mummies and death. And right. What we see in this poem is that the Egyptians were really people in love with life. They loved life. And, the reason their tombs are so well preserved is they wanted to carry as much of that life with them in the afterlife. And ironically, that's how we know so much about what their life was like, because they were in love with it. And I think this here captures, it's just, even though it has a dour tone and a carpe diem, it's clearly a poem that loves life and takes great joy in living.
That's a great point. You can't get much more optimistic than that. Hey, honey, we better stockpile some beer we're going to need it in the afterlife,
Right.
And the Egyptians loved their beer, which ties us into Yeats' drinking song.
There we go.
Yeah, and we have a lot of translations. So yeah, it's fun to see the many different takes, Egyptian takes on death. And I mean, I threw in, we have a Schiller poem that's also the veiled image at Sais, where I offer an analysis and a bit of historical background and some speculative uh, ideas as well. But that's also counterpointed with Schiller. We include a whole lecture, Schiller's Mission of Moses, which also deals with the relationship of, the origins of Judeo-Christianity and Egypt, right? Moses had an interesting relationship to Egypt as a Jew that was brought up within an aristocratic Egyptian household. And Schiller considered himself, first and foremost, a historian, which I think is interesting. Poet was like number four. It was historian, dramatist, uh, critic, and poet. And so it's nice to see as well, though, we think of poets as today, they sort of just, they do one thing, but not really. But, there's this idea of the poet. He's just writing in his room or whatnot. But, no, the poets are historians, right? They're some of the best historically speaking. If we think of Homer, if we think of Dante, it's one of the best ways to actually capture history, the drama of history, right? As opposed to, if you don't necessarily have the time for Gibbon's, decline and fall of the Roman Empire, you don't have 2 years to spare. Read the poets. So yeah, Schiller offers some great insights, I think. And look, I know, Rachel, you have a time constraint here. So yeah, up to you. But I think we can begin to wrap it up. Again, our issue features, there's like 15 different poets. There's a lot of stuff. So I just encourage people, our viewers, to get yourself a copy. Get your grandkids a copy or something. Like young folks, they need good stuff to read too. And these days, it's there's a lot of good stuff, but there's information overload. So I think it's important and we want physical things, right? I don't know about other folks. It's nice to read stuff online, and I'm grateful that we can discover so many beautiful and wonderful things online. But I do think people also, we're tactile, right? We want to hold something. Want to carry it while you're waiting at the airport.
This is the book is one of the, technologically speaking, it's maybe the greatest data compression device that ever existed, because it can last thousands of years, whereas a thumb drive's probably going to crumble. You know what I mean? It's amazing. You can bury this several layers under the ground, and it can be excavated one day and read. And so it's books are amazing.
We're thinking ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, and you can thumb through the pages without having to have 10 tabs open.
Yes.
Yeah, only for the
my tabs are the dog ears, though.
So guys, you know what? I don't think this is a bad place to wrap up our discussion. And I'll be able to, once we put this through editing, we'll throw in a few extra things here and there and bring it all together. Plugs. We like a shameless plug, what people maybe have out there that they would like to advertise, or, anybody's got books or websites or things they want to.
Yeah, my first book came out in 2022, and it's called Sister Sorrow. And so it's out there. That one is available from Amazon or from Finishing Line Press, which was a publisher. Poetteachermom.com is my website, which is, yeah, And I also have a Substack that I have some things on.
We're gonna link to everything, by the way. So yeah, everything folks are mentioning, we can link to.
Yep. Yep. I get a little stage fright because I want to focus on my real life versus the virtual life that out there that's necessary. And so I really do struggle with how to be present to everything like that. Yeah. But I do have some sort of presence there. So
Good, good.
Stuart, do you have your poems in a collection yet, or do we still need to?
Well, no, I don't know. I haven't thought that far enough ahead. I have a few, maybe some to send to you.
We can figure something out, though. I know you have. I think you have more than enough poems.
I
for.
I wonder what are some future themes for journal editions that you've pondered.
Yeah, well, your people will speak with my people after, and we'll correspond.
All right.
We'll make something happen. There's never a shortage of ideas around here. So yeah, I already know what I'm going to say. So yeah, we'll talk about that.
All right.
Adam?
I have a lot out there. I have 5 volumes of poetry. Here's the most recent, Elysium. All are available on Amazon. I also post poems periodically on Substack. I have a YouTube channel which has my musical works on it. And then I am planning on releasing The Opening of the Mouth and collecting some of the essays I've written and that Dave has graciously run in the past. So those will be coming out.
Give me 1 second, guys. I just realized I need to plug this in. When is your sorry about that. When is your Egypt-ish book coming out?
Hopefully by the end of this year, maybe this fall.
Okay.
That's exciting.
Well, thank you.
Well, yeah, I say it's been such a pleasure. I've admired both your works, and it's really nice to chat. If not in person, it's the next best thing.
Yeah.
And to see you in real time and discuss, our shared enthusiasms.
Likewise, this is a nice forum because I don't know.
You've lost.
I mean, we're going to have a lot of other opportunities, and we are building towards more, I think, in-person events at some point. I think that's the natural next step. That's how everything, I believe, comes together, right? You always had salons, the great salon tradition of whether it's 17th, 18th century. This is where Bach was studied by Mozart, Haydn. They got together at von Sweeten's salon and they played Bach's musical offering, right? They discussed fugues, and that transformed Mozart and Haydn's compositional approach. So that's always a thing. And so there are many, we're just getting started, but this is a nice way to at least get to know who's out there, hear from them. And so it's great that you guys joined us, and we'll have a lot of folks joining us very soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, David. As always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be back again shortly.